The colder it got in the Laurentian highlands, the fewer people came down the logging road, and that was exactly how Sergeant Nadia— no, that name was in the file. Let me start clean. The colder it got along the Laurentian logging road, the fewer people made the turn past the rusted gate, and Corporal Vera Sinclair had counted on that. She had moved up here in February, when the snow was still chest-deep in the ditches, and the nearest neighbor was 11 kilometers south. She had chosen the property precisely because nobody could find it without already knowing where to look. The cabin had belonged to her grandfather. 2 rooms, a wood stove, a hand pump well that froze over twice a winter. She had re-chinked the logs herself, replaced 3 of the roof joists, and run a single strand of electrical wire from a small diesel generator she only ran when she needed to charge the satellite phone. She did not use the satellite phone. She had Ghost. Ghost was a Belgian Malinois, 7 years old, with a pale grey mask that had earned him the name when he was still a pup at the Valcartier training facility. He had been assigned to Vera during her 2nd deployment. Kandahar, then Erbil, then a stretch in Mali that nobody officially talked about. He had been officially retired from service 14 months ago, the same week Vera had submitted her own release papers and driven north without telling anyone where she was going. Her mother had called 4 times. Her former unit's welfare officer had called twice. She had let them all go to voicemail and had not listened to the messages. Ghost slept at the foot of her cot and ate exactly what she ate, and asked for absolutely nothing. That was the arrangement, and it suited her perfectly. She had not spoken to another person since October. The morning it happened, the sky over the hills was the flat grey of old pewter, and the air had that particular stillness that comes before a front moves in. Vera had been splitting birch since 6, working the maul in a steady rhythm, sweat soaking through her base layer despite the -15 temperature. She liked the work for the same reason she liked all physical labor. It required her complete attention and left room for nothing else. Ghost was lying at the edge of the woodpile, chin on his paws, watching the tree line. He did that sometimes. Vera had learned years ago not to dismiss it. She set the maul down and straightened up slowly. Her left side had been bothering her for a week. She had noticed it the way she noticed most discomfort, with a mild cataloguing sort of attention, the way you might note a weather change. A dull ache below her ribcage on the left. She had attributed it to the way she was favoring her right shoulder since the injury in Mali, the slight compensation in her stance that her physiotherapist, back when she had a physiotherapist, had pointed out twice. By noon, the ache had moved. By 2 in the afternoon, it was no longer dull. She was at the stove, heating water for rice when the pain hit her properly. It came in a wave, sudden enough that she gripped the edge of the counter and knocked the pot sideways. Ghost was on his feet immediately, moving to her side, pressing his body against her leg. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice came out wrong. Too thin, too careful. Ghost did not believe her. He whined once, low and urgent. Vera made it to the cot and sat down. She took inventory the way she had been trained to, methodical, working from the outside in, pulse elevated, skin clammy. The pain was concentrated now, somewhere in her lower left abdomen, and when she pressed there with 2 fingers, she had to breathe through her teeth to stay level. She knew what this could be. She also knew what it meant if she was right. She looked at the satellite phone on the shelf. Then she looked at Ghost. "We're not calling anyone," she said. Ghost lay down across her feet and did not move. She lasted another 18 hours. She told herself later, on the days when she was honest with herself, that she had not been trying to die. She had simply been hoping the problem would resolve itself, which was a distinction that seemed important at the time, and less so in retrospect. By the 2nd morning, she could not stand without the wall. By noon, the fever had climbed past the point where she could track time reliably. At some point, Ghost stopped lying across her feet and started pacing. She could hear him, back and forth, a sound like someone worrying a floor smooth. Every few minutes he would come to her cot and push his nose against her hand, and she would feel the cold of it and make some small motion to reassure him, and then she would drift again. She did not remember making the call. She remembered picking up the phone. She remembered the voice of the dispatcher, a woman's voice, very calm and clear, asking her name and location. She remembered trying to say the coordinates she had memorized for exactly this situation, which she had always thought was preparedness, and now recognized as something closer to a joke she had been playing on herself. She remembered Ghost's paw on her wrist as she was talking, pressing down as if he could anchor her. Then there was a gap. Then there were lights, headlights coming through the frost on the cabin window, breaking up into scattered fragments of white and orange. Then there were voices outside, and Ghost began to bark. The paramedics later said the dog would not let them through the door. The first one in, a young man named Thierry, with a reflective strip across the chest of his jacket, had gotten as far as the threshold before Ghost planted himself in the opening and let out a sound that nobody in that clearing mistook for a bluff. Thierry backed up. He was a professional and knew better than to push a working dog in guard mode. They tried calling through the door. Vera could hear them, distantly, like voices coming up through water. She tried to tell Ghost to stand down, but her voice was barely a thread, and he did not move. The second paramedic had gone back to the truck to call for police assistance. In a city, this would have taken minutes. Out here, it meant 40 minutes minimum, probably longer, and by that math Vera did not have 40 minutes to spare. What happened next she did not witness directly. She was told about it later, in pieces, by different people, and she assembled the account the way you assemble something from a kit when you've lost the instructions, working out which piece connects to which by the shape of the thing. A second vehicle had come down the logging road behind the ambulance, a Subaru Outback with Quebec plates, moving fast for the conditions. It stopped behind the ambulance and someone got out. A woman, young, late 20s, maybe 30, dark hair tucked under a toque, wearing a Canada Goose jacket and the kind of worn canvas boots that meant she actually used them. She walked straight past the paramedics and the truck without stopping, went directly to the cabin door, and spoke 2 words. The paramedics said. The dog froze, then he stepped aside. Vera did not know any of this until she was already in the hospital. She surfaced properly 3 days after she had been admitted, which was longer than she would have thought possible and shorter, the doctors told her, than it might have been. The infection had been in her bloodstream. Another 12 hours without intervention and the conversation would have been very different. The room she was in was small and clean and smelled of disinfectant and the particular dry heat of hospital air in winter. There was a window showing a flat white sky. There was a monitor beside her bed. There were no flowers because nobody knew she was here. Or so she assumed, until she turned her head and saw the woman sitting in the chair by the door. She was reading something on her phone with her ankles crossed, still in the canvas boots. The Canada Goose jacket folded over the back of the chair. She had dark circles under her eyes that suggested she had not slept much, or possibly had slept right here in that chair, which on reflection seemed likely. Vera stared at her. The woman looked up. She had a careful, watchful face, the kind of face that has learned to be very still before reacting. "You're awake," she said, not like a question. "Where is my dog?" Vera said. Her voice came out as a scrape. "He's with the vet in St. Donat. They're keeping him there for the moment. He's not injured. They just needed somewhere to put him while you were in here." She paused. "He ate. He slept. He's fine." Vera looked at the ceiling. She felt the particular vertiginous quality of consciousness returning after a fever, everything slightly too bright, slightly too detailed. The edges of things carrying a weight they did not usually carry. "Who are you?" she said. The woman set her phone down on her knee. "My name is Simon Marchand," she said. Something moved through Vera, not recognition exactly, but the shadow of it. The shape of a name she had heard in a different context, in a different life. Marchand, she said. Yes. Vera closed her eyes. Behind her eyelids, unbidden and immediate, she saw Corporal Simon Marchand, 29 years old, from Trois-Rivières, who had laughed too loudly at his own jokes and never remembered to replace the water in the Nalgene he kept in the left pocket of his kit, who had a sister he talked about with the specific, slightly embarrassed affection of older brothers, who had not made it out of a compound in northern Mali on the 23rd of March, 2 years ago, who she had not been able to bring home. She did not open her eyes for a long time. She and Simon had been on the same reconnaissance team for 11 months before Mali. That was long enough to know someone not in the way you know people from the outside, from the words they say and the face they choose to show, but from the inside, from how they function under genuine pressure, from what they reach for when they are afraid. Simon Marchand had been one of the best she had worked with, patient, precise, with the kind of low-drama competence that doesn't make for good stories, but keeps people alive. He had not been dramatic about his skills, and he had not been dramatic about his fear, which was the rarest thing. Most people were dramatic about one or the other. Ghost had loved him. That was the part Vera had not been able to set down in the months since. Ghost was not a dog who offered himself indiscriminately. He was a working animal with a working animal's focused affections, and during the months they had all been on the same team, he had accepted Simon as part of his operational unit. He would take food from Simon's hand. He would sit beside him at rest. He had once, memorably, refused to continue a search sweep until Simon had come back from where he had been positioned and physically touched the dog's flank. Some protocol of trust that Ghost had invented and enforced on his own terms. When Simon did not come back from the compound, Ghost had been the one who found him. Vera had never told anyone that. There were parts of what happened in Mali that existed in official reports and parts that did not, and this was one of the parts that did not. Ghost had tracked Simon through smoke and secondary debris for 40 minutes after the mortar hit, pulling against his lead, refusing to reroute, until Vera had finally let him go ahead. He had led her directly, without hesitation, through 2 collapsed walls and a doorway that was barely standing. She had done what needed to be done. She had brought Simon home, and she had driven north in February and taken the satellite phone off the hook, because that was what she had left. "He talked about you," Laurentian said. Vera opened her eyes. The room was the same. The flat white sky outside the window had not changed. "He talked about the dog too," Laurentian continued. She had a measured way of speaking, not careful in the guarded sense, but careful in the way of someone who has thought about language and knows what it can and cannot do. "He called him Ghost in the messages home. He wasn't supposed to say operational details, I know, but he would say things like, 'Ghost was on point today. Ghost found the thing we needed. Ghost is sleeping across my feet right now and I can't move, so I'm just going to stay here.'" Vera said nothing. Her throat was closed. "He told me about you," Laurentian said. "Not specific things, he was careful about that. But he said there was someone on his team he trusted completely, that when things were bad, there was one person he would stake everything on." She paused. "He didn't say your name in those messages. I looked you up after. It took a while." Vera looked at her. "How did you find the cabin?" "His email drafts. He had the coordinates saved. He said if anything ever happened." Laurentian stopped, looked down at her phone on her knee, then back up. He never finished that sentence in the draft, but the coordinates were there. The monitor beside the bed marked time. Somewhere down the hall, a cart moved past. "He had a plan," Laurentian said softly. "He thought if he kept the draft, then if something happened, someone would find it, someone who knew to look." Vera thought about Simon and his Nalgene, the specific sound of his laugh, about the way he had said goodbye before the Mali deployment, which at the time she had not understood was different from all the other goodbyes, and which she had been understanding slowly and recursively for 2 years. "I couldn't bring him back alive," she said. The words came out flat, factual. She had rehearsed this conversation in her head enough times that she thought she was past the part where it broke her, and then she discovered that she was not. We went in after the strike. Ghost led us. Ghost found him. But by the time he was all ready, she stopped. There was a long silence. "I know," Lorraine said. "I was told. Not everything, but enough. It should have been me," Vera said. "The positioning that day, it should have been me forward, not him. I made the call. It was my decision, and I put him..." "Vera." Lorraine said her name quietly, but with a weight to it. Not an interruption, a hand on the arm. "He would not want you to be up on a mountain alone, waiting to not be found." The room held its silence. "What was the word?" Vera said finally. "The two words. What did you say to Ghost?" Lorraine looked at her with that careful, watchful face. "I said Simon's girl," she said. "It's what he called himself in the recordings he sent home. When he talked about Ghost, he always said, 'He thinks he's Simon's girl, this dog.' Just those two words. I didn't know if it would work. I just thought, if Simon had been with this dog long enough, and if he talked to him the way he talked to everything..." She did not finish. Vera looked at the window. She thought about Ghost pressing his paw against her wrist in the dark of the cabin, holding her to the earth while she tried to drift away from it. "It worked," Vera said. "Yes," said Lorraine. The infection was a perforated diverticulitis, a failure of a small section of intestinal wall that had probably been building for months, made worse by the cold, the isolation, the nutrition that had been, the doctor told her with a particularly Canadian kind of delicacy, perhaps not optimal. It required surgery. The surgery required a week of recovery in the hospital, followed by 4 to 6 weeks of restricted activity, and a diet she found catastrophically boring, and followed with grim discipline anyway. Lorraine drove back to Montreal the day after Vera woke up. She had a job. She was a physiotherapist with a clinic in Rosemont, which Vera found absurdly fitting in a way she could not quite articulate. She left her number on a card she had written by hand, which for some reason affected Vera more than she would have expected. The vet in Saint Donna drove Ghost in 2 days after Vera was moved to a regular room. He stood in the doorway with the dog on a short lead and looked at the nurse's station, and then back at Vera and said, with admirable pragmatism, "I'll pretend I don't know about the policy on animals in hospitals if you pretend you don't know I'm doing it." Ghost came through the door and walked directly to Vera's bed and put his head on the mattress beside her hand. He did not make a sound. He just stood there and pressed his forehead against her fingers. Vera scratched behind his ears and looked at the ceiling and felt something in her chest shift, something that had been locked in the same position for so long she had stopped noticing the pressure of it, the way you stop noticing the weight of a pack until someone takes it off you. "Okay," she said, to herself or to Ghost or to no one in particular. "Okay." She called her mother from the hospital. It was the first time she had heard her mother's voice in 4 months, and her mother, who was a woman of considerable composure, a retired schoolteacher from Sudbury who did not believe in making things larger than they were, said hello and then was quiet for a moment, and then said, in a voice that she was very clearly holding level by main force, "I've been leaving you messages," said. "I'm sorry. I'm in the hospital." Another silence. "What happened?" "I got sick. I'm fine now. I'm going to be fine." She paused. "I have some things to sort out." Her mother said, "Come home when you're ready. There's no timeline on that." Vera looked at Ghost, who was asleep at the foot of the bed with his legs twitching, running somewhere in a dream. "I know," she said. "I'll be in touch." She hung up and sat for a while with the phone in her lap. Outside it had started snowing, not the fine, blowing snow of a front moving through, but the thick, deliberate kind that settles on everything and makes the world smaller and quieter, and, if you are not alone with it, almost beautiful. She watched it come down on the parking lot below, on the cars, on the bare branches of the maples along the street. She thought about Simon Marchand, saving her coordinates in an email draft he never sent, because he trusted her the way he trusted his dog. Because some things don't require the words to be spoken aloud to be completely understood. She thought about his sister driving 4 hours in the dark down a logging road because she knew the word that would open the door. She thought about Ghost leading her through the smoke, through the debris, through the wall, not because anyone had commanded him, but because that was what he knew how to do, because that was what it meant when you committed yourself to someone. 3 weeks after she was discharged, Vera drove back to the cabin. Not to stay. The pipes had frozen while she was gone, and the generator had run out of fuel, and the whole structure needed work she was not currently in a position to do alone. She went back to collect what needed collecting, to close it down properly for the rest of the winter. Ghost rode in the passenger seat of the truck with his head on the door, watching the road the way he always watched everything. With complete attention, missing nothing. She packed 2 bags and a box, the bag with her grandfather's things, the bag with her kit, the box with the things she had been not looking at for 2 years, the letters Simon had sent from deployment, forwarded by the base liaison after his death, which she had read once and then sealed back in their envelopes and not opened again. She stood in the middle of the cabin for a long time with the box in her arms. Then she put it in the truck. She had called Lorraine the week before. Not about the box, about something else, something practical, about Ghost's vet records and the name of a good doctor in Montreal. The conversation had lasted 40 minutes and covered considerably more ground than vet records, which had not surprised her but had, she realized afterward, been the first conversation she had actively wanted to continue in longer than she could accurately account for. She locked the cabin. She scratched Ghost's ears. She got in the truck. The logging road was icy in the shadows and clear where the afternoon sun hit it, and she drove slowly, taking her time, watching the light change on the snow between the spruce trees. Ghost pressed his nose to the window and fogged it, looked at her, fogged it again. "Yeah," she said, "I know." She did not know exactly what came next. She knew she needed a doctor and a physiotherapist, and probably a particular kind of conversation that was not technically a physiotherapist's job, but that many veterans she knew had managed to find through that door. She knew Ghost needed a proper vet in the city, and a park nearby, and more to do than watch a tree line all winter. She knew Lorraine had texted that morning to say there was a reasonable sublet available in her building in Rosemont, and that she had not mentioned this casually, and that Vera had not dismissed it. She knew, too, that there was a box in the back of the truck she had been not looking at for 2 years, and that at some point, when she was ready, she was going to have to open it, not because it would be easy. Because Simon had trusted her with his dog, and his coordinates, and the specific weight of his absence, and she had decided, somewhere between the frozen pipes and the flat white sky, and a woman's voice saying Simon's girl to a dog in a dark doorway, that she was going to do something useful with all of that. She turned out of the logging road onto the highway. The snow had been plowed, the surface clean and grey and straight ahead of her. Ghost settled into his seat and sighed. The standoff, such as it was over.